In the industry of medicine, there is this big myth that getting a medical education will lead to freedom. That if you have this job that with this certification and this licensure, that the financial aspect of it will lead to freedom. You will always feel free to do what you want to do. And that is so far from the truth. Freedom, money is such a small part of freedom. It's a big part of it, but it's not the whole picture. Freedom comes from following what your true purpose is, because then you feel that peace inside of you. So if I give anybody advice that comes around that's in their medical training, I'm like, make sure you're not doing it for the money. The money will never make you happy in medicine.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of The Inventive Expert. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we help startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. You ever need help with yours? Just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Now, today we've got another great guest on the podcast, Amanda Gwin. And Amanda's going to talk a little bit about, more specifically about medical providers who are burned out and how to deal with that burnout, which is definitely, I think, even a more expansive thing where dealing with burnout is something that a lot of people have to deal with. Also recognizing a bit of what are the symptoms of other issues, including burnout and other issues that you may come up with. Also dealing with feeling stuck because you invested a lot of time and money into an education to get there, and what you might want to consider. And then medicine as a whole, maybe a little bit, is it broken? And if so, how to fix it. So it should be a great discussion. And with that much as an introduction, welcome on the podcast, Amanda.
Thank you, Devin. That was a beautiful introduction. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. Excited to have you on. So now, before we dive into a lot of the topics at hand, which I think will make for some great discussions, if for those of you that haven't had a chance, Amanda was on the Inventive Journey, a sister podcast of this one. So if you haven't had a chance, definitely go check out that episode and make sure to hear her journey. But for those that haven't had a chance to check out the episode and saying, hey, I'd just like to learn a little bit about Amanda, give us a little bit of introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Amanda Gwin. I'm the CEO of Amanda Gwin Coaching, and I help medical professionals, specifically more moms, although I do have some great men I've worked with that have had great outcomes. Moms in medicine who are overwhelmed and burnout find meaning and freedom. So by trade, I was first a registered nurse. I did pediatrics. And then I felt like I needed more. I felt like I needed more answers. And I did not recognize that I was actually already burned out in medicine. I thought more education would give me freedom, which I know many people can sympathize with, that that's not always the case. So I went and got more education, became a PA. It was a fantastic move. I never regret it. But I spent 7 years as a PA, and then experienced my next level of burnout towards the end of that, when I was put on bed rest for a high-risk pregnancy that was essentially brought on only by my lifestyle, not anything medical. And so it was a big eye-opening experience for me to start living differently, open my eyes to a lot of the ways that I was essentially self-sabotaging myself, and better yet, understand my purpose, which is to really help people understand where they're suffering and find their freedom.
No, definitely makes perfect sense, and that was a great introduction. So now, with that as a bit of a background, I'm going, diving into a few of the topics at hand. I think, in general, and I'll probably expand it out, and I know yours is particular with medical providers. But, one of the things that I think a lot of people are dealing with in a lot of different industries is burnout.
Right.
You have attorneys. I know, interesting, or kind of side note, attorneys have one of the worst alcoholism rates because they are dealing with lots of stress, and more often than not they turn to alcohol because they're burned out, stressed out, and have a lot of deadlines they're meeting. So certainly not in the medical profession, but another analogous industry which deals with a lot of burnout. And I think the medical industry, especially even beforehand, but especially with COVID and all the additional stresses, people are getting in there. So maybe before we talk a little bit about how to deal with burnout, help us understand what are some of the symptoms of burnout, what are not some of the symptoms of burnout, or how do you start to recognize, am I getting there, to be, because you almost have to identify the problem before you start to deal with it. So how do you identify those symptoms?
Right, right. So, I mean, you can experience burnout in anything you do. I mean, you can experience burnout as a parent, as a professional. I mean, as I don't know, the PTA president. It doesn't matter. Burnout is a symptom of a lot of other things. And I love how you brought law into this because I feel like lawyers can actually be. And I had a lady on in my group who spoke on burnout as well, and she called it emotional first responders. And I feel like actually attorneys can be lumped into that group of people too, especially like if you think of like injury law and things like that. I mean, those are some of the people that come in and first support and I mean, it's a very emotional, as very didactic as law and medicine can be. It's a very emotional profession. So
Mhm.
I think the burnout is higher in these emotional first responder areas of working. Things that are burnout is you develop an apathy. I always use my own barometer when I was in medicine of like, if I caught myself not caring about a patient's outcome, I always like, whoa, I need to take a step back because that's not who I am and that's not how I was trained. So but it's not because you're a bad person, it's just because you're burnt out. So
Mhm.
apathy, you a big one that's not always talked about but it's overlooked is an inability to concentrate. Like you show up and you're sitting there, but you can't get anything done. And then people think they're ADD, which that's, neurodivergence is of course an issue, but they're just, they just can't do what they used to do. They're frustrated with themselves because they can't accomplish in a day. They don't feel as proficient in their jobs. Extreme exhaustion, high anxiety that's untreated leading to depression. Maybe you already had a little underlying anxiety and depression from situations in your life. You bring in a really stressful job where you're not giving yourself a break and you're not doing anything to take care of yourself, and that just expedites everything and leads to burnout. I think it's important to, I'm almost on the spectrum of like, I would listen to every symptom as burnout until you rule it out as not burnout. But some things that are not burnout, it's just being generally annoyed with your job, just being, like just tired because you stayed up late, frustrated with administration because they don't seem to understand how your job works, little different nuances of that are not burnout. Burnout is a symptom of like a conglomerate of everything compiling on you, and it being like your home life being hard, your work life being hard, your personal life being hard, and then you bring in the stress of this job, and then you're just like throwing your arms up. I would say the number one thing, if you feel like you're just throwing your arms up every day and screw it, you're probably on the face of burnout.
No, and I think that's some good guideline. Now I'll there kind of maybe one follow-up question, which is, maybe at least in my perspective, and you can tell me everywhere where I'm wrong, but there's a levels of burnout that are, levels of severity of burnout, meaning I can be a bit burned out just because I've had to work a lot of long hours trying to keep caught up or get a project done, or otherwise, there's a temporary sense of reasons why I'm getting burned out. But if things were to go back to normal, I can work a more normal job, have normal balance, then I'll probably that burnout will subside. And then I also know people that, hey, you're just working a lot of hours, a long period of time, or you just get worn out of doing the same thing or doing your job or your profession, and you get to the point that it's no longer just temporary burnout, but it's a much longer or extended, or hey, I need a much more drastic change in order to deal with that burnout. So is that true? Is there a spectrum of burnout, or and how do you go about? And it kind of leads into, and I know I'm doing a compound question, but how do you then figure out based on your burnout what to do? In other words, if it's temporary and I just wait it out, or is it long term and I need to make a drastic change? So how do you identify how burned out you are, and then what do you do about it?
Yeah. And the thing with burnout is it's so individual, right? Everybody's threshold is going to be so much lower, or I mean, lower in different situations. Maybe somebody's threshold is much higher. We just got done with COVID, and you could easily say that people that maybe were never burned out with medicine all of a sudden developed burnout because there was no end in sight.
Mm.
Um, and so I think that what you're talking about, like, how do you know when, maybe this is just situational and it will pass? actually comes from being very aware of burnout individually to you. You know, CPAs know that after April 15th that they're going to be able to take a break until October, right? Or maybe they're going to take a month or two off until they gear back up for late taxes. You know, there's a lot of professions that don't have that built in flow. So we have to create that for ourselves. You know, you have to create a very good self-awareness of, like, my personal one was, I know that I am next level burned out if I all of a sudden don't care about a patient's outcome. That's not how I want to practice medicine, nor do I want any of my patients to experience that part of me. It didn't happen very often, but I knew that's where I got if I got to that place. You know, the problem is that I hadn't educated myself enough about burnout or done enough of my work with somebody who knew enough about burnout to know that, hey, like, I need to pull the ripcord. I need to design something within myself that includes more rest, more communication with my higher ups, more communication with my peers, and a lot of rest and regeneration time, you know?
Mhm.
So I love that, you know, that idea of, like, how do you know if it's just a situation versus the full out, you know, level 10 burnout? And that comes from awareness of yourself because it's very individual.
No, that definitely makes sense. So now you gain that awareness, and let's say temporary burnout. It sounds like putting words in your mouth that eventually that will pass. You can especially if you're just saying, hey, I'm a tax accountant working long hours. I know April 15th comes around, I will get a break. I won't be under the gun, and then I can recharge, rejuvenate, and get back to what I love.
Mhm.
Great. Then you just a little bit of waiting it out and seeing if you can balance it a little bit in the meantime. Everybody has those. I think almost every job you're going to have those times where you just have deadlines or you're having that urgent matter. But now let's take where you are getting more burned or long-term burned out, meaning now you are needing that you're not caring about the patients, or legal field, you're not caring about the case, or taxes, you're saying, I don't care if I prepare their
Right.
taxes or not,
Yeah.
whatever that is. Then how do you go about dealing with that, or what are the next steps to deal with that burnout? Is it you go to a new profession, you just do jettison everything you've done, or do you take steps to meditate, or do you go see a therapist, or kind of what do you do, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that is such a great question. That a lot of the industry things that are going on. You know, I see the world as really wounded right now, and the only way for the world to heal is for us to individually heal. And so, you know, to address this healing, we have to have support, and we have to support each other, and we have to be our own advocates. So, you know, when you say, you're at level 10 burnout, what do you do? The first thing you do is you admit that you're burned out. I mean, I know that sounds really cliche and uh, very kind of silly, but I'm one person to say I was burned out, and it took me 6 months post burnout to even say, oh, I was burned out, because nobody had ever normalized that for me. And in medicine specifically, and probably in a lot of the higher education industries, such as law and, you know, accounting and any of these emotional first responder industries, it's seen as a weakness. If you go to your higher ups and you say, I'm burned out, they're going to say, well, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you keeping up? The problem is you, right?
Mm,
And so that places a little bit of a, you know, yes, we have to own the problem. But when we ask for help, there has to be help there. We have to have support. If you're at level 10, you have to have support, whether that's a therapist, whether that's a coach, whether that's a really good, you know, friend network or peer network or something. Like, this is not a problem. If I can express one thing, this is not a problem that you're going to fix on your own. We're human beings. We're supposed to be together, you know?
mm. So recognize the problem, and I get it. And feel like it's kind of like AA meetings where it's, hi, I'm Devin and I have or a problem type of a thing. But I do think that, there is a reason why that's there, in the sense that if you don't recognize a problem, you're certainly not going to likely be able to deal with it, because you're never going to take those steps if you can't even acknowledge it's a problem. So let's say, okay, I've recognized, hey, I'm just burned out. I don't want to deal with patients or clients, or I'm not going to do it. I'm phoning it in, or I'm, not even giving it my all, and it's suffering. And that's not who I am. And that's not how I want to do my practice. So I say, okay, got my problem. And I start to reach out to others. And, is it one, because if I was, other than I know you're in the coaching, and do this, most people aren't going to know where to turn, so if they
Right.
turn to you, if you're available, but let's say you're not, they're in a different place or they haven't heard of you for the, sake of the conversation, who do you turn to? Is it your spouse, your wife, your friend, your clergyman, your doctor, your whatever? Because I mean, it's hard when you're burned out, because even
All
if
of
you
them.
recognize you're burned out, you're still saying, great, what do I do? And so what are some practical maybe first steps or people or things that people can start to do once they recognize they're burned out?
Right. Actually, all of those people. And, and then I would say reach out to everyone you feel like you feel secure with, you feel safety with, and then really hone in on who's that person that's going to help me get to the core of the burnout. Because we talked about before that burnout is a symptom, you know, um, who is that person that is I'm going to be able to have a safe conversation about and say, holy cow, I've spent $200,000 in this education to become this thing. I'm ashamed to say that this might not be where I need to be. Or maybe you're not in the wrong profession and that's not why you're burned out. Maybe you have poor boundaries and you need to work with a therapist to really discover what is a good boundary. How do I set good boundaries? How do I implement good boundaries? When somebody breaks my boundary, how do I circle around and re-implement the boundary? And how do I turn off my people pleaser to actually set up these boundaries? A big symptom of a big problem with burnout is lack of boundaries, especially in medicine where they're awarded literally physically, fiscally, and emotionally for breaching their boundaries. Hey, we're super short tonight. We'll pay you time and a half to come in, plus you'll get an award, and you're going to be seen as this team player. Like that is just a boundary breach on so many different levels. But until you have somebody that helps you identify boundaries, you know, um, it seems very foreign. The way
Mm.
of interacting seems very foreign unless you have a good solid support system of somebody that is helping you guide through this process. So yeah, yeah, I would love to work with them, but I'm not available to everybody. I'm just saying you have to work with somebody that you feel very safe with and who's going to help you identify the problem and then further help you implement the solution.
No, that makes perfect sense. So now you start to work on burnout. You start to go talk with people. You start to, figure out what is the cause of burnout. Is it, hey, I need to sometimes it is just leave the field. You're not going to do it anymore. And it's not a good fit for you anymore. And sometimes it's, hey, I just need to I need someone to talk to, or I need to get that work-life balance, or I just need to not work so many hours, or I need to find a hobby or something to get my mind off. And so you start to work through and figure out for you what that is. And if you can find a coach, even better. Now, one of the things that I think is difficult, let's say you get to the point where you talk it out with people and say, okay, I need to go to a different profession. So
Right.
let's take a doctor as an example, just because we're talking on the medical field. And the doctor says, okay, I spent, 10 plus years of my life with residency and schooling and everything else. And I'm hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and I have to pay that off. And I can't really just leave the field because one, I don't know what I would do. Two, I don't have any other educational background. And three, I need to make enough money to pay off all my debt. How do you figure out what to do in that point? Because it feels a little bit like you're stuck. And I know attorneys that are the same way. Hey, I went to law school,
Right.
probably 9 years, and I've got hundreds of thousands of debt, and I really only have one usable skill set. And so it's kind of one where a lot of industries, especially it's when you're getting in places where you're having to have a higher level of education, invest more years and go into debt more typically. How do you go about figuring out how to even deal with that?
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's a really big deal, right? I mean, a really big deal. So you do it kind of like how you'd eat a dinosaur one bite at a time.
Mm.
And that this is something that I would never recommend anybody do unless they've really thought about it and contemplated it for a lot and they feel really good about their decision to just leave coldly and just say, I'm done with this. I'm going to go move on with no backup plan, no inner work around it. No, that's very shocking to our neurological system to just give the middle finger to whatever situation we're in. And sometimes burnout can lead to that. And I do understand that and I want to normalize that. But this is never something that I would ever say that somebody needs to do on their own. This is where the support really comes in: career coaching, counseling, therapy, coaching, everything. Like you have to have support. And then you have to dissect every piece of it. Okay, financially, like, yeah, this is a really expensive education. I have to do the emotional work around the fact that I chose this profession. I invested 10, 15 years of my life into this, and then it doesn't make me happy,
Mm.
and really shifting your mindset around that was a waste to, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful for that knowledge. Look what that knowledge gave me. I will never lose that knowledge. I will always have this unbelievable understanding of how to do this job. Say something were that catastrophic happened and you needed to go back to that, you always could. Does that need to be your need to mean you're miserable from now till the end of retirement? Absolutely not. So financially, get a really good financial plan with a financial advisor. Again, not something you should be doing on your own. Make a plan. um, and then I really tell people all the time to really sit down and evaluate, why did you go into this profession? If you're in medicine, what was your motivation? And 90% of the time, they're going to say to help people. We are programmed to help people. That is like, that makes us human. Lawyers love to help people, social workers love to help people. I mean, helping people is beautiful. What is really unique about how you help people? What is really unique about you as an individual human? And it may mean that you are still helping people, but you're not in the medical system. I promise that you were gifted with something
Mm.
incredibly unique that is going to take care of you. I really believe that's how we're all designed. It's just a matter of finding that about ourselves. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time, and that is okay. Normalizing that yet again. Hey, maybe I'm going to stay in medicine for another 2 years. I'm going to give myself a 2-year plan. I'm going to figure out my finances. I'm going to get to the core of why I'm so miserable. I'm going to figure out ways that I can navigate through my day every day to be a little bit more happy, a little bit more content, and a little bit more at ease while I'm navigating myself away. Or maybe your whole plan is, I'm going to stay in medicine because I really freaking love medicine, and I'm going to figure out how to make medicine work for me.
No, and I think that makes sense, or that makes perfect sense. Now, I think it's a lot easier or harder said than, easier said than done. It's a lot harder to do. But so, one or maybe one follow-up question, because you started to hit on that, and it's, identifying, okay, I went into medicine because I want to help people. When you're looking for, you do reach a bit of that extreme and you are burned out and you're saying, okay, I've got to make a more drastic change. Do you look for analogous fields? In other words, okay, maybe I stay in medicine, but rather than be, and I'm making it up, an ER doctor, I go to a generalist that has a more normal schedule? Or is it, how do you, and I get, I'm sure it's or individualized, but how do you figure out, is it, do I just leave medicine entirely, or do I go to a different field? Or, because I think that's the hardest part, but where you're almost trying to identify, what do I do now that I'm leaving the field? I acknowledge it. I've come to the conclusion, hey, be an ER doctor, and I'm making it up just because I watch
Yeah.
ER shows sometimes.
Yeah.
But being an ER doctor is not what I'm going to be able to do long term, and I'm burned out and I can't do it anymore, and I'm not going to serve my patients well, and I'm not going to do well, and it's not a good fit. Do you leave the field in general and go back to school, or do you go find a different part of the profession? Or any thoughts or ideas?
Yeah, totally. So I think the first thing to do before you even think about those like movement pieces is to really identify like your core desire of, how do I want to help people? How do I want to serve my higher purpose? What is my purpose? Like, and keep that as like your true north. For me, for example, I figured out that it was much more rewarding to serve people in a coaching capacity than it was at a bedside capacity. Does that mean I have left medicine entirely? No. Medicine is still supporting me while I am following my true north, which is building my coaching business. My coaching business is always growing, and medicine is there to support me. Now, I've found so many different ways to kind of navigate my hours and negotiate with different physicians around, like, here's what I can give. And medicine is a very unique industry in that there's a high need, and so you really can negotiate way more than you think you can.
Mm.
And it's a matter of knowing your worth and asking for what you're worth. That being said, there is a podcast called The Doctor's Crossing, and it is all different ways that doctors can find other ways to be in medicine but not be at the bedside, not be intertwined into the hospital system or the administration barriers, those kind of things. I know a lot of physicians that have moved into coaching. I know some physicians that have moved into coaching that are still hospital administrators. That's a really cool combination. There are maybe you move into more of an insurance role, where you're still using your medical knowledge, but you're not dealing with so much red tape. There's so many different things that if you just, again, I know this is cliche and I'm not sure how your audience will resonate with this, but really, once you open the universe, you open that question up, say, universe, I am open for you to showing me where my path is and how my gifts are going to be used. And it's really remarkable how many things will come across your path of things that can really, you can really feel impactful to society without that heaviness.
No, and I think that's a great takeaway. So we're starting to get towards the end of the podcast, and we've only even scratched the surface. It's a very big topic, but I do want to shift gears just for a minute and ask kind of just maybe a general, just fun end of the episode before we get to the final question. I don't know if that makes sense. Question of a question before a question, which is, I think a decent amount of people, and I think it's been shifting and pivoting with COVID and with lockdowns and with politicization and even insurance and costs and inflation and all of those things, which is people are saying, is the medical system broken? Is it, need to change? And how do we go about doing it? So any thoughts, and I know it's a very broad question, but is the medical system perfect? Is it broken? Is it somewhere in the middle? And kind of thoughts on things that we might, or people might consider as far as working towards changing it.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And there's so many, I mean, anybody that's in an industry is probably going to say the industry's broken, right? The law industry is going to say it's like being like this, the system is rigged. It's rigged to make you unhappy. Um, but what I can speak to is really medicine. And yes, and I hate the word broken because it kind of like brings this connotation that there's something wrong with us. But until industries are run by healed people, like I don't say not broken people, healed or healing people, the industry itself will always be in that constant state of needing healed. And so what needs to happen, and it seems like almost this insurmountable, like can't wrap your head around, like if you think about medicine, which employs, I think it's like 40% of people in some capacity, maybe not direct patient care, but I mean, it's a lot of people. You think about Pfizer and all these different entities of medicine. I mean, it is big. Like, how do you conquer that? And you conquer it one person at a time. And you normalize healing. I really think normalizing, especially at the bedside, like the biggest impact of burnout right now is at our bedside nurses, especially after COVID. I mean, there's a 50% burnout rate in nurses. They're leaving the field left and right. I work with individual nurses who are going and putting their stake up in real estate just to avoid the bedside because they are so burned out. And, we just weren't prepared for this. We weren't. Now we're doing damage control on top of what was already a healing system. But we have to heal the individual. We have to normalize healing the individual. We have to place, administrative, I don't want to say orders, but almost like this understood training, almost like CME. We train every year to continue to be medical. And, why don't we train every year to continue to be human beings? And so this, this understood and deep, what's the word I'm looking for? A deep desire to see the employee as a whole and what that means to treat them as a whole. There is a very big individual responsibility, but all of this has to come from the top up. And for right now, that may not happen. It may be until we can get there. Eventually, that will be the healed system. We have to heal everyone in, and then eventually everything will rise. This is the tide that lifts all boats. I promise you, if you were a nurse at the bedside or a physician in the ER, as you heal, you will inadvertently affect everyone who is in your realm. Everyone will lift in some capacity because of your healing, and we just have to individually keep going like that.
No, I think that's definitely a great way to end the episode, but definitely a great takeaway. So now, as we are wrapping up the episode, I always wrap up with the same question at the end of each episode. So we'll jump to that now, which is, within your industry, what is the biggest myth and why is it wrong?
So I thought about this. I have two, because I'm in the industry of coaching. I'm in the industry of medicine. So
all right, give us one of each.
Okay. So in the industry of medicine, there is this big myth that getting a medical education will lead to freedom. that if you have this job that with this certification and this licensure, that the financial aspect of it will lead to freedom. You will always feel free to do what you want to do. And that is so far from the truth. Freedom, money is such a small part of freedom. It's a big part of it, but it's not the whole picture. Freedom comes from following what your true purpose is, because then you feel that peace inside of you. So if I give anybody advice that comes around that's, in their medical training, I'm like, make sure you're not doing it for the money. The money will never make you happy in medicine. And then with coaching, because I'm in this realm of coaching, it's and I say this because I foolishly made this mistake at the beginning, is that, oh, I'll just get this training and I'll be a coach, right?
Mm.
No. What I do with people is so deeply intimate and requires such a deep level of trust that you have to allow yourself the time to build that trust and that rapport with people before they're going to let you into that deep aspect of their life. And also, you have to develop that deep trust and rapport with yourself, that you have what it takes to support people through these deep, difficult parts of their lives. So, I just, if I could give any advice to a oncoming coach, it's to buffer in that time of building that trust, which can be up to a year or more to build that rapport with yourself and your clientele.
Mm. No, I that's definitely some great myths to dispel, and definitely some great takeaways as to why they're wrong. So definitely appreciate that. So, well, now with that, as we were wrapping up the episode, if people want to reach out to you, they're saying, "Oh, I'm so burned out. I want to be your customer. I want to be your client. I want to be your patient. I want to be your." Also, and if they're saying, "Hey, I want to be your employee. I'd love to do what you do," or "I want to be an investor in your business," if you're taking on investors, or "I want to just be your next best friend," any or all of the above, what's the best way to reach out to you, contact you, find out more?
Yes, I love to connect with people and to hear their stories. I love to hear stories. Even if you just want to tell me your story, I always learn something from everybody's story. So, yes, I'm on Facebook, Amanda Gwin. I am on Instagram, Amanda Gwin Coaching. My website is amandagwincoaching.com. I'm also on LinkedIn as Amanda Gwin. And all my details about my different packages and things like that are on my website. And I also have a Facebook group called the Burnout Sanctuary. I do a ton of free live trainings, a lot of interviews with really, really accomplished people that have navigated burnout, that have different avenues of approaching it. So a lot of great interviews, good free information. Hop on over there and absorb as much as you can. One of my big core values in my business is being very generous. Maybe you're not ready to pay somebody, or maybe you're just not able to afford it yet. I don't want that to hold anybody back. Please be in my world and just absorb the free stuff.
Awesome. Well, I definitely are some great ways to connect with you. Definitely invite people to reach out, connect, and if nothing else, make a new best friend. So, well, with that, now as we wrap up the episode, thank you again for coming on the podcast. It's been fun. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you can help us to share this expertise with all the other founders, co-founders, and startups out there, just go and click subscribe, leave us a review, click share. Helps us to make sure we can help as many startups and small businesses owners out there as possible. Also, if you ever need, on that note, if you ever need any help with your patents, your trademarks, or anything else with your startup, your small business, just go to strategymeeting.com, grab some time with us to chat, and we're always here to help. Well, thank you again, Amanda, for coming on the podcast, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.
Thank you, Devin. It was a pleasure to have me.